The sky over Asliel was a bruised purple, streaked with fiery orange as the alien warship's thrusters flickered out of control. Below, in the heart of the underground colony, the sirens began to wail, cutting through the thick air. Alistair Nash could feel the tremor beneath his boots as the ground shook, a warning of the destruction heading their way. He didn't flinch. He didn't need to. Brace for impact, his voice crackled over the intercom. He snapped the control levers of the damaged shuttle into place, steering it toward the only patch of open ground left in the colony's perimeter. The console's red lights danced, and a shrill warning blared. He gritted his teeth, sweat dripping down his face despite the chill in the cockpit. If he didn't get them on the ground in the next 30 seconds, they were all dead. He fought to keep the panic from rising in his chest, focusing instead on the singular task before him, survival. "Sarah, Quran, you're up," Nash ordered, pressing the comms button again, his voice steady. A brief flicker of static and then, "Understood," came the sharp response from his lieutenant, Serafine Costa. "Engaging the ground teams. We'll buy you some time." Nash's fingers moved instinctively over the controls, his eyes never leaving the falling ship. He felt a pang of bitterness. This wasn't how he had imagined his final days. The shuttle's landing gear scraped the soil just as the warship's thrusters ignited in one final, catastrophic explosion. The shockwave ripped through the colony like a wave of molten metal, sending dust and debris flying in all directions. Nash gripped the armrests, his jaw clenched against the violent force. The ship slammed into the earth, grinding to a halt. The alarms fell silent. Nash exhaled sharply. They had made it, barely. He stood, unstrapping himself from the seat. The familiar hum of his pulse was louder than the wreckage surrounding them, the overwhelming weight of what came next pressing in. Through the shattered viewport, he could see figures approaching, his team. He stepped down from the cockpit, his boots hitting the cold concrete of the colony's exterior. Serafine Costa stood at the head of a small squad of soldiers, her expression unreadable as she scanned the wreckage. The tinge of dust in the air didn't faze her, she was a professional, through and through. "Cap," she said as she stepped forward, eyes narrowing at the distant horizon. "We have incoming." Nash's gaze followed hers, squinting against the fading light. 3 dark silhouettes hovered in the distance, a heavy pulse of energy vibrating through the ground as they drew closer. They weren't human. "We don't have much time," Sarah added. Her voice was tight, but there was no hesitation in her stance. Behind her, Colonel Coran Alashtra strode forward, flanked by 2 heavily armed soldiers. The hardness in her face was matched only by the cold set of her jaw. "You always seem to find yourself in the middle of trouble, Nash," Coran said, her voice thick with suspicion. "What's going on here?" Nash's eyes flicked to the sky. "This is only the beginning, Colonel. They're not here for a fight, they're here for something we're sitting on." Her lips tightened. "What are you talking about?" He paused, the weight of the knowledge pressing down on him. "Power. Something ancient. They'll stop at nothing to get it." Coran's eyes narrowed. "We're talking about some kind of weapon, aren't we? Something that could turn the tide." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Nash's voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. "It's worse than that." Coran didn't say anything for a moment, studying him carefully, her fingers twitching toward her sidearm. "You need to explain yourself, Nash. If you know something." "I know enough." Nash's eyes hardened. "And you're going to want to trust me on this. There's a reason they're coming for this planet, and it's not for its resources." Sarah stepped forward, pulling up a data pad. "The scans show strange energy signatures beneath us, unlike anything we've seen before. They could be linked to an old artifact buried deep in the colony's lower levels." Her voice trailed off, disbelief creeping in. Nash nodded. "That's our only shot. We need to get down there before they do." Coran exchanged a glance with Sarah, and then her eyes returned to Nash. "So you're telling me that ancient alien tech down below is our best chance to survive?" "It's our only chance," Nash confirmed. "If we let them get their hands on it first, we're done." We might not even be able to stop them if they fully unlock it. Sarah's hand hovered over her sidearm. So what's the plan? We dig it out ourselves? No, Nash said firmly. We're not digging. We're infiltrating. We get in, get the tech, and we fight like hell to get it back. Karan let out a low laugh, but it was laced with genuine respect. You always did have a flair for the impossible. Sometimes, Nash said, turning toward the entrance to the depths of the colony, it's all we've got. They began to move toward the gates. As the dim light from the warships above flickered and shifted, Nash could feel the pull of something far greater than just the lives of those around him. There was a weight to the air now, something both ancient and powerful, and Nash knew one thing for certain: the world they had known was about to end. The only question was whether humanity had the strength to rise again. The ground trembled once more, this time from something far darker than the warships above. Nash didn't hesitate. Not this time. They were going in. The metallic doors to the lower levels of the colony slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing the dim, concrete passageways that stretched into the belly of a sleel. A cold draft crawled along the walls, carrying the scent of rust and stale air. Nash exhaled, his breath visible in the low light. It had been years since he had ventured this deep into the facility. The lower levels were nothing but a labyrinth of decaying infrastructure and forgotten technologies, a place where the colony's true history was buried. Stay sharp, Nash muttered, his voice low but steady. He glanced over his shoulder at his team, Serafine Costa, Colonel Karan Aleshtra, and the rest of their small squad. They followed in silence, each step echoing off the walls like a drumbeat in the cold stillness. Sarah's eyes flicked to a data pad she was scanning as they walked. The small screen cast a faint blue glow on her face, highlighting the strain in her features. The energy signatures are getting stronger, she said, her tone focused. It's definitely down here, but I'm not getting any specific readings. It's like the energy source is cloaked or scattered. Nash nodded, his mind racing. Whatever they were about to encounter, it was something beyond their understanding, something the enemy had been hunting for centuries. But this wasn't just any artifact. It was ancient, alien in origin, and possibly the key to reshaping the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. They couldn't let the invaders find it first. Karan, the ever-pragmatic officer, tightened her grip on her rifle. It's a trap. I know it. We're walking right into their hands. If you think the aliens will just let us take this thing, you're mistaken. Nash didn't look at her. I know the risks. But we don't have a choice, Colonel. This isn't about fighting them off anymore, it's about keeping this planet from being wiped off the map. They reached a junction, where a flickering light above cast long shadows across the hallway. Nash signaled for them to stop. His mind was already in overdrive, thinking through every possible scenario. The tension in the air was thick, like the very walls were holding their breath. Sarah leaned against the wall, the data pad in her hands still scanning the depths. The readings are faint, but they're definitely linked to something larger. It could be a containment field of some sort. How long until we find it? Karan asked, impatience creeping into her voice. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she tapped the pad, adjusting some settings. Maybe an hour. Hard to tell with all the interference. Nash's eyes darted around the space. It felt like they were being watched. His instincts, honed by years of combat, prickled. His hand drifted to the hilt of his sidearm, fingers brushing the cold steel. The alien presence was palpable, pressing down on the air like a weight. The silence between them felt oppressive now, as if they had entered a forbidden zone, one that hadn't been disturbed in millennia. Without warning, a distant, high-pitched sound cut through the stillness. It was barely audible, but unmistakable. A shrill, unnatural hum. Nash's heart skipped a beat. They're here. The others tensed. Sarah's eyes locked onto his. How do you know? Trust me, Nash growled, already pulling his sidearm from its holster. It's the same signal I heard back when I was on the front lines. The aliens are close, too close. The sound grew louder, filling the space around them, vibrating in Nash's chest. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Something was coming. The atmosphere seemed to warp, as if reality itself were bending. And then, like a ghost, it appeared. From the shadows, a figure emerged, its form shifting and blurring, impossible to focus on. It hovered just above the ground, a faint glow emanating from its jagged outline. The creature was neither alien nor machine, it was something else entirely. Its silhouette shifted like liquid metal, constantly changing shape, as though it could be anything at once. Sarah swore under her breath, backing away. "What the hell is that?" Nash kept his eyes locked on the creature, his body poised for action. "Not sure. But whatever it is, it's not friendly." The creature's glowing eyes, if they could even be called eyes, flickered as it regarded them. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, without warning, it lunged forward with a speed that seemed impossible, its form blurring as it stretched toward them. Nash dove to the side, barely avoiding the creature's sharp, electric tendrils. "Move," he shouted, rolling to his feet. The rest of the team scattered, opening fire on the being, but their weapons did little more than spark off its shifting form. "Nothing's working," Karan yelled, retreating behind a support column. "It's like we're fighting smoke." Nash gritted his teeth. The creature was toying with them, moving faster than they could react. But there was a glimmer of hope. If the alien entity was here, they were on the right path. This was no random guardian. It was guarding something critical. Sarah's voice broke through the chaos. "It's a protector. Part of the containment mechanism," she shouted, her hand gripping the pad tight. "We're getting closer." The creature screeched, the sound vibrating through Nash's bones. It surged forward again, this time faster, with a fury that suggested it had no intention of letting them pass. Nash knew they couldn't outrun it, not like this. There was only one choice left. He pulled a grenade from his belt, primed it, and tossed it into the creature's path. As it exploded, sending a shockwave through the air, the creature faltered, momentarily stunned. "Now!" Nash shouted, sprinting ahead. They surged forward, dodging the creature's last desperate strike. The path ahead was unclear, but it was the only way. Nash couldn't afford to hesitate. The race was on. The stakes had never been higher. The air had grown heavy with the oppressive stillness of the underground as Nash and his team continued their descent deeper into the heart of the colony. The hum of their footsteps echoed off the cold metal walls, amplified in the narrow, claustrophobic passages. Every corner seemed to hide another threat, and the farther they went, the less the colony felt like home. It was a place of decay now, abandoned for years, but something primal stirred beneath the crumbling concrete. Seraphine Costa led the way, her hand hovering near the grip of her rifle, every sense trained for danger. She moved with the precision of a seasoned officer, her sharp eyes scanning the darkened halls. The quiet had become a pressing weight, filling the spaces between their breaths, pressing against their ears. "We're close," she said softly, glancing back over her shoulder. Her voice, though quiet, held an edge of urgency. Nash nodded. "How much further?" "About 5 minutes," Sarah replied, her brow furrowed as she checked the readings on her datapad. "The readings are erratic. I can't pinpoint the exact location, but it's definitely down here." Karan Alashtra, the group's unyielding colonel, was silent as she followed a step behind, her face unreadable. Her presence was a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Strong, practical, and a bit too skeptical for Nash's taste, but they needed each other. Her gaze drifted to the darkened corridor ahead, her fingers lightly tapping the side of her rifle. "This doesn't feel right," Karan muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "If this is some kind of alien tech, why wasn't it discovered before? This is an old colony, no one's been down here in decades." Nash didn't respond immediately, the weight of her question sitting uncomfortably in his mind. The answers he had, the truth that gnawed at him, was something he was reluctant to fully admit. They were running on fumes, hope, desperation, and the faintest hints of something beyond their understanding. We don't have the luxury of doubts, Nash finally said, his voice low and resolute. We either find it, or they do. The words felt hollow as soon as he said them, but there was no time to dwell. Behind them, the thrum of machinery reverberated through the concrete, and Nash's senses went on high alert. Without warning, a mechanical screech split the silence. The floor beneath their feet trembled. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, falling like snow in the dim light. They had triggered something ancient and powerful. Something that didn't want to be found. Sarah's eyes widened. This is it, she said, voice tight with the realization. Whatever is down here, it's waking up. The walls groaned as if in response, and the air grew colder, thick with the hum of unseen forces. Karan raised her rifle. Everyone, stay sharp. This is where it gets dangerous. They continued forward, the path narrowing as they descended into an even darker section of the facility. The lights flickered weakly, casting shadows that danced unnaturally across the walls. The deeper they went, the more it felt as though the space itself was alive, watching them, waiting. At the end of the corridor, a massive door loomed, covered in strange symbols that no one had ever been able to decipher. The door was the size of a hangar bay, its surface marred by age, yet something about it still radiated power. It's locked, Sarah said, examining the panel beside it. But the energy readings are pulsing from behind this door. This is it. Nash's pulse quickened. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The artifact, the ancient technology that could change the tide of the war, was behind that door. How do we get in? Karan asked, her voice taut. Sarah glanced at the control panel, then back at Nash. It's going to take a minute to hack into the system. Stand by. They gathered around her as she worked, her fingers flying over the console. Nash stood a few paces away, eyes scanning the darkened hall for any signs of movement. The air around them felt thick, as though something was stirring just beyond their reach. Karan stood next to him, her rifle trained on the door. What do you think we're really dealing with down here, Nash? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the symbols etched into the door. There was a feeling deep in his gut, one he couldn't shake. Whatever it is, it's old. Older than anything we've seen before. Older than the invaders, she asked, raising an eyebrow. Nash hesitated, his mind wrestling with the truth. Yes. But I'm starting to wonder if they're not the real threat. Before he could say more, the door groaned. Sarah's fingers paused over the control panel, eyes widening in disbelief. It's opening. The massive door shuddered and began to split open with a groan of ancient machinery. The air was thick with static now, and the entire facility seemed to tremble in response. A deep, resonant hum filled the space, vibrating through their bones. The first thing Nash saw was a flash of pale light, glowing, almost ethereal. And beyond it, a room that stretched impossibly far, the size of a cathedral. At the center of the room stood a structure, tall, dark, and pulsing with the same energy that had haunted their every step. The energy readings were off the charts now. We found it, Sarah whispered. But the moment the door fully opened, they heard it, an unmistakable sound, the faint echo of footsteps. Not from behind them, but from ahead. Something was waiting for them inside. The cavernous chamber ahead loomed like the mouth of a beast, its walls stretching far beyond what the human eye could see. Light pulsed from the strange artifact in the center, a dark monolith standing tall and imposing. It hummed with an unnatural energy, filling the air with an almost tangible pressure. Nash's heartbeat quickened as he stepped forward, the weight of their mission bearing down on him. This was it, the moment that could change the course of everything. Stay close, he murmured to his team, his voice low and steady. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. Seraphine Costa, still gripping her datapad, moved beside him, her eyes scanning the room. The readings are fluctuating, this thing is like nothing we've ever encountered before. If we can get it activated, we might be able to use it against the invaders. But how? Karan Alestra's voice was laced with skepticism. We don't even know what it does. It could tear this whole place apart. Better to take the risk than to let them use it first, Nash replied, his eyes fixed on the pulsing monolith. He could feel the heat radiating off it, the oppressive energy it emitted curling around him like an invisible hand. The sound of footsteps behind them made Nash's spine stiffen. He turned sharply to find a figure emerging from the shadows. The shape was familiar, too familiar. The alien figure that had hunted them in the depths of the facility now stood in the doorway, its body shimmering like liquid metal. Its eerie eyes, too many, scattered across its face, locked onto Nash with predatory intensity. The creature's form shifted and coalesced into something sharper, more dangerous. Sarah took a cautious step back. That's the Guardian. It's not just protecting this place, it's trying to stop us from using the artifact. Then we stop it first, Nash said, unslinging his rifle and taking aim. He didn't hesitate. Before he could fire, the Guardian's form twisted, a blur of light and metal. It moved impossibly fast, darting toward them with a scream that rattled their bones. The air shimmered around it as though the laws of physics no longer applied. Karan opened fire first, her shots striking the shifting form with flashes of blue and white. But the bullets passed right through the Guardian, as though it were made of smoke. The creature screeched again, an unnerving sound that echoed off the stone walls and rattled their teeth. "We need a plan," Sarah yelled, her voice laced with panic. She ducked behind a pillar as another tendril of light reached toward them, narrowly missing her. "We don't have time," Nash barked. "Get to the monolith. If we can activate it, maybe it'll help us." With a grimace, Sarah nodded, darting toward the monolith. But the Guardian was relentless. It surged forward again, faster than before, forcing Nash to leap out of its path. He landed hard on the stone floor, rolling to his feet. He had to think fast, there was no room for error now. "Cover me," he yelled. Karan and Sarah exchanged a brief glance before opening fire again. Their weapons seemed almost ineffective against the creature's shifting form, but they kept the pressure on, trying to slow its advance. Nash sprinted toward the monolith. The air was thick, vibrating with the energy emanating from the strange device. He could feel it now, raw, untamed power, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. The monolith pulsed with energy, a dark hum reverberating through his chest. Reaching the base, Nash spotted the control panel, a series of ancient symbols glowing faintly beside it. His hand moved instinctively over the console, fingers flying over the surface, searching for the right sequence. The symbols seemed to shift and change with every touch, an alien language he couldn't begin to understand. Behind him, the Guardian lunged again, its tendrils reaching for his back. Nash barely ducked in time, the air snapping as the creature passed overhead. He couldn't afford to look away now. He had to. Suddenly, the console pulsed beneath his fingers, and the symbols flared to life. A sharp, piercing noise erupted from the monolith, its surface crackling with energy. The Guardian shrieked in fury, but Nash's mind was elsewhere now. He could feel the artifact responding to his command, the sheer force of its power channeling through the room. It was building to something. With a final push, he slammed his palm against the console. The room lit up in an explosion of light. The Guardian stopped mid-lunge, its form shuddering. It seemed to hesitate, then screamed one final time, its body flickering like a broken signal before collapsing into a pile of glowing, shifting fragments. A low, echoing sound resonated through the chamber as the Guardian disintegrated, its threat extinguished. Nash staggered to his feet, his heart racing. "It worked," he said, barely believing his own words. But there was no time to celebrate. The monolith hummed louder now, its energy building to a dangerous pitch. "We need to get out of here," Karan said, her voice urgent. "It's not going to hold." Sarah turned to Nash, her face pale but determined. "We've got what we came for. But we need to leave. Now." Nash nodded, his gaze lingering on the now dying artifact. It had been their salvation, their weapon against the invaders. But as it began to crack, glowing fissures running across its surface, Nash knew one thing for sure, they had won, for now. As they turned to leave, the sound of rumbling grew louder, and the facility began to shake. But they didn't look back. They had changed the course of the war. And humanity had just taken the first step toward reclaiming its future.